The table they seated me at was in the back corner, near the kitchen door. Not because there wasn't room. There were empty seats closer to where my sister and her fiancé were holding court, laughing loud enough that the other diners turned to look. There was plenty of room. They just didn't put me there. My mother had organized the seating herself. I knew this because she told me 3 days before the rehearsal dinner that she'd arranged everything perfectly and that I should just show up and not make it weird. She said that last part like it was a genuine concern, like I was the one who made things weird. I drove 40 minutes to get to that restaurant. I'd taken the afternoon off work, which cost me more than I want to admit because, in my line of work, afternoons off aren't free. I bought a new dress, dark green, fitted at the waist, the kind of thing you wear when you want to feel like yourself even when everyone around you is determined to make you feel like no one. I walked in and found my name card between 2 cousins I'd met exactly once at a funeral and across from an empty chair that stayed empty the entire night. My sister's rehearsal dinner. My sister Brooke. Wait, no, I need to start earlier than that, because this story doesn't begin at a restaurant. It begins about 6 years before in a kitchen that smelled like burnt coffee and old arguments, when my father looked at me across the table and said, "I just don't think college is for everyone, sweetheart." He meant me. He meant it wasn't for me. I was 22. I'd already left. I'd already packed 2 bags and driven to a city where I knew exactly nobody and started over in a way that people in my family would never fully understand, because understanding it would require them to admit they'd been wrong about what I was capable of. My name is Nadia. I'm the middle child, which in my family means I am the invisible one. My older sister. I'll call her by what everyone calls her, Bree. She was the golden child. Homecoming court, full scholarship, married at 26 to a man my parents approved of before she'd even decided she approved of him. My younger brother, Colt, was the baby. The funny one, the one my mother still called my boy, even when he was in his 30s. And then there was me. I'd left home at 22 after a semester of community college that my parents funded reluctantly and criticized constantly. I'd moved to Charlotte, North Carolina with $1,100 and a contact name scribbled on a post-it from a woman I'd met at a conference I'd technically snuck into. I'd waited tables for 8 months. I'd taken every hospitality course I could find online, most of them free, some of them not. I'd taught my way into a front desk position at a boutique hotel downtown when I was 23. Worked every shift they'd give me, learned the back end of the business the way you only can when you're watching closely because you have no other choice. By 27, I was managing a property. By 30, I was a co-owner of one. The hotel was called the Alderton. It wasn't the biggest in Charlotte. It wasn't meant to be. 12 floors, 44 rooms, a rooftop bar that had been written up in 3 regional publications and 1 national one. My business partner, a quiet and precise woman named Dix who had 30 years on me and 0 patience for nonsense, had found the building when it was a failing extended stay motel and seen something in it that nobody else did. She'd also seen something in me, which I try not to think about too hard because it still makes me want to cry in a way I'm not entirely comfortable with. We'd spent 2 years renovating. We'd made decisions together over conference calls and construction blueprints and late nights where we ate takeout on the lobby floor because there was nowhere else to sit. We'd opened on a Tuesday in April, quietly, without fanfare, because Dick said fanfare was for people who needed other people to believe in them, and we already believed in ourselves. The Alderton filled up within 3 weeks. We had a wait list by summer. My family didn't know any of this. This wasn't an accident. I want to be clear about that. I hadn't hidden it out of shame or strategy. I'd hidden it because every time I tried to share something about my life with my mother, she'd found a way to redirect the conversation to Bree. Every time I'd called my father with good news, he'd said something like, "That's nice, honey," in a voice that made it clear he'd already stopped listening. My brother was fine. Colt was never cruel, just absent in the way that people are when they're not paying attention. But he had a tendency to repeat things to my parents without realizing it, so I'd learned to keep him at a gentle arm's length when it came to specifics. I'd stopped trying to make them proud. That's not bitterness. That's just a thing you arrive at, eventually, when you've spent enough years offering something to people who keep setting it down. So when Bree called me in February to tell me she was getting married to a man named Prescott, who I'd met twice, who sold commercial real estate and had a very firm handshake, and not much else that I could identify, and that the rehearsal dinner would be in Charlotte of all places, I said I'd come. Of course I'd come. She was my sister. What I didn't mention was that she'd chosen the Alderton. I don't know if she knew. I've gone back and forth on this. She might have found it through a wedding planner. She might have seen it in one of those regional write-ups. The name Nadia Corte appeared in a few places in connection with the hotel. But it appeared alongside Dix's name, and in my experience, when people aren't looking for something, they don't find it even when it's right in front of them. My family had never been looking for me. The rehearsal dinner was booked for a Friday in March. 42 guests. The private dining room on the second floor, the one with the big windows that looked out over the street, and the hand-plastered walls that had taken an artisan 3 weeks to finish. My team had set it up beautifully. I knew this because I'd seen the setup 2 days before, when I'd stopped by in my usual capacity as co-owner, walking through the space with our events coordinator, a steady and meticulous woman named Theo, short for Theodora, who had been with us since we opened. I told Theo that I'd be attending the event as a guest, just a family dinner. She raised one eyebrow in a way that communicated she had questions and the professionalism not to ask them. I appreciated that about her. The night of the rehearsal dinner, I took a car from my apartment. I thought about driving, but I didn't want to deal with parking, and also, if I'm honest, I wanted a few minutes in the back seat alone to prepare myself. There's a certain kind of composure you have to put on before you walk into a room where people have decided who you are. It takes a little time to get it on straight. I wore the green dress. When I walked in, the hostess, a new hire named Sam, who had only been with us for 6 weeks and had therefore never met me in person, greeted me with a professional smile and asked if I was there for the Prescott-Harmon rehearsal dinner. I said I was. She walked me to the private dining room and opened the door, and the noise of my family poured out into the hallway like something that had been waiting. My mother saw me first. She did the thing she always did, which was smile in a way that started at her mouth and didn't travel anywhere else, and say, "You made it," like it had been in question. My father waved from across the room. He was deep in conversation with a man I didn't recognize. Tall, early 60s, silver hair, the particular kind of ease that people carry when they're used to being listened to. I'd find out who he was later. Bree floated over in ivory and cream and hugged me with one arm, which is a kind of hug that communicates affection, while also communicating that you're being careful not to wrinkle anything. She looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful. I told her so and meant it. "So glad you're here," she said, and then someone called her name from the other side of the room and she was gone. I found my place card. Back corner, near the kitchen door, between two cousins who introduced themselves with the careful politeness of people who don't remember meeting you but suspect they have. I sat down. I ordered a glass of wine. I watched my family move around the room like a solar system, with Bree and Prescott at the center, and everyone orbiting at various distances according to their importance. My mother's orbit was tight and constant. My father drifted from cluster to cluster, laughing at things, touching people's arms. Colt arrived late and immediately became funny, the way he always did, filling whatever space he walked into with noise. I watched from the corner near the kitchen door. About 40 minutes in, one of the cousins turned to me and asked what I did for work. I said I worked in hospitality. "Oh, like a hotel?" she said. "Something like that," I said. She nodded and turned back to her menu. "This is the part I need you to understand. I wasn't angry. I know that might be hard to believe given everything, but I wasn't. I'd made peace, or something close to it, with the fact that my family had a version of me in their heads that they preferred to the actual one. The version in their heads was the one who'd failed to launch, who'd dropped out of community college, who'd moved to a city she didn't know for reasons they'd never understood. That version of me was easier for them. It explained why I sat in the back corner. It explained the one-armed hug. What I hadn't made peace with was what happened next. I'd gotten up to use the restroom. On my way back, I passed close enough to the main table to catch a piece of conversation I wasn't meant to hear. My mother, talking to my aunt, her voice not quite as quiet as she thought. We just have to hope she doesn't cause a scene, you know how she gets. My aunt murmured something sympathetic. She's always been the difficult one, my mother continued. Even as a child, just never quite figured herself out. I stood in the hallway outside the dining room for a moment. The noise of the dinner floated to the closed door. I could hear my brother laughing. I could hear Bree saying something that made the whole table respond at once. I thought about going back in and sitting in my corner and finishing my wine and driving home. Then the door at the end of the hallway opened. It was the man with the silver hair, the one my father had been talking to earlier. He was on his phone, stepping out for a call, and when he rounded the corner and nearly walked into me, he stopped and looked up, and his expression shifted from distracted to something else entirely. "I'm sorry, Miss Corte," he said. I recognized him then. His name was Whitmore, Gideon Whitmore. He was the regional director of a commercial development group that had approached the Alderton twice about an acquisition deal, both times unsuccessfully. We'd had one meeting in person about a year before in my office on the second floor of the hotel we were currently standing in. "Mr. Whitmore," I said. He laughed a little, a surprised sound. "I had no idea. Are you here for the—" He gestured back toward the dining room. "The rehearsal dinner," I said. "The bride is my sister." He looked genuinely taken aback. "I'm here as a colleague of the groom's father. I had no idea you'd be— small world." He paused. "You know, I was just telling someone the other day about the Alderton. My company has been following what you've built here very closely. This property is, well..." He glanced around the hallway at the plastered walls and the low warm lighting and the runner on the floor that I'd sourced from a woman in Asheville who wove them by hand. "It speaks for itself." "Thank you," I said. "We should talk again," he said. "Seriously, the offer has changed since last year, significantly." He said it the way people say things when they mean it but don't want to oversell it. We'd be talking about a number that would, well, it's a different conversation. I said we could schedule something in the new year. He nodded, then tilted his head toward the dining room. "Your family must be very proud. What you've done here is genuinely remarkable." I smiled. "We're working on it," I said. He went back to his call. I stood in the hallway for another moment. Then I went back inside. I sat down in my corner near the kitchen door. One of the cousins had left and the other was on her phone. The speeches had started. Prescott's father was saying something about legacy and family. My mother was nodding with her hands folded in her lap, the picture of composed maternal grace. Bree caught my eye across the room and gave me a small smile. I smiled back. Then my father stood up to say a few words about the groom's family and what this marriage meant. He talked about the importance of marrying someone solid, someone accomplished, someone who had built something. He used the word proud 4 times in 3 minutes. He did not look at me once. Afterward, when the speeches were done and people were pushing back their chairs and finding their coats, Gideon Whitmore made his way toward the main table to say goodbye to Prescott's father. He passed close to where my father was standing, and my father, being my father, extended a hand with the reflexive sociability of someone who has never met a room he couldn't work. "Jim Harmon," my father said. "Father of the bride." Gideon Whitmore shook his hand. "Gideon Whitmore, congratulations. Wonderful evening. Beautiful venue." "Oh, isn't it?" my mother said, appearing at my father's elbow with the 6th sense she had for conversations that might be worth joining. "We found it through the wedding planner. It's just gorgeous." Gideon Whitmore smiled pleasantly. "It really is. Your daughter has exceptional taste." My mother blinked. "Bree does have a good eye, yes." "I meant your other daughter," Whitmore said, with the mildly confused tone of someone who assumes he's filling in obvious information, not detonating something. "Nadia. We've worked together. She co-owns the property." He glanced around again with the expression of someone giving a compliment they think is already understood. The Alderton is hers. Well, hers and her partner's. But this is her place. The silence lasted maybe 2 seconds. It felt longer. My father's expression did a thing that I don't have a clean word for. It moved through several stations: confusion, recalibration, something that might have been the beginning of embarrassment, before settling on a careful blankness. My mother's hands moved to her pearls, a tale I'd known since childhood. Gideon Whitmore, reading the room, said something gracious and general and excused himself with the smoothness of someone practiced at leaving complicated situations. He caught my eye on his way out and gave the smallest of nods. I returned it. I was still in my corner near the kitchen door. My father walked over slowly. He moved the way people move when they need a moment to figure out what they're walking toward. Nadia, he said. Just my name, like he was testing whether it still worked. Hi, Dad. He looked at me for a long moment. The noise of the dinner was winding down around us, coats and goodbyes, and the sound of my brother making everyone laugh one last time near the exit. This is yours, my father said finally, not a question. Co-owned, I said. But yes, since 2021. He nodded slowly. He looked at the room. The hand-plastered walls, the warm light, the windows Bree had picked this place for, maybe not knowing, maybe not thinking to look. You didn't tell us, he said. I didn't think you'd ask, I said. That landed the way I knew it would. He had the decency not to argue with it. My mother had drifted over by then, close enough to hear. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, we would have wanted to know. I looked at her. I thought about the hallway, her voice coming through the door. Just never quite figured herself out. I know, Mom, I said, gently, meaning it and not meaning it at the same time, the way you do when you've been doing something long enough that it becomes automatic. Bree found me near the elevator when the evening was breaking up. She was holding her shoes in one hand and her bouquet of rehearsal flowers in the other, and she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in a long time. Why didn't you tell me? She said. You didn't ask, I said. I wasn't trying to be unkind. It was just the true answer. She was quiet for a moment. This is a really beautiful place, Nadia. Thank you, I said. I think so too. We hugged before I left. She used both arms this time. On the way down in the elevator, I thought about what Gideon Whitmore had said, that the Alderton spoke for itself. I'd smiled when he said it, the way you smile at a compliment, but standing in that elevator, I thought about what it actually meant, that the work speaks, that the walls and the light and the runner from the woman in Asheville speak, that you can spend years being invisible to the people who are supposed to see you, and the work keeps speaking anyway, to the people who are paying attention. The lobby was quiet when I came out. The night desk attendant looked up and gave me a nod. I nodded back and walked out into the March air and stood on the sidewalk for a minute, in my green dress, in front of the building I'd helped make out of something that no one else had believed in. I wasn't the difficult one. I wasn't the one who'd never figured herself out. I was exactly where I'd always been going. It just took everyone else a little longer to catch up. I flagged a car home. The city looked the same as it always did at that hour, lit up and indifferent and full of possibility in the way that cities are when you've stopped needing them to notice you. I watched it through the window. I had a meeting with Dix on Monday and a call to return from Gideon Whitmore's office. There was a lot of work left to do. That part hadn't changed. That part, I thought, as the car pulled away from the curb and the lights of the Alderton disappeared in the mirror, was never going to change. And I was glad. I used to think the hardest part was being overlooked. I was wrong. The hardest part is what comes before that. The moment you decide whether being overlooked is going to define you, or just describe a season you pass through. I think about the corner table a lot. Not with bitterness, not anymore. I think about it the way you think about a place you survived. I sat near a kitchen door in a room I owned, next to cousins who didn't remember my name. while my mother told my aunt I'd never quite figured myself out. And I didn't fall apart. I didn't make a scene. I ordered a glass of wine and I sat with it, and I watched my family move through the room like I was a piece of furniture. That took something. I don't think people talk enough about what it actually takes to hold yourself together when the people who were supposed to believe in you first have decided, very clearly and without much discussion, that you aren't worth believing in. It takes a kind of integrity that doesn't announce itself. It's quiet and it's unglamorous and it looks from the outside like nothing at all. What I know now is that the work was always speaking. Every decision I made, every early morning, every course I took online at midnight, every time I chose to stay in a difficult situation and figure it out instead of walking away, all of it was accumulating into something real, even when nobody in my family was watching. Especially then, because the truth is, you don't build anything lasting by trying to prove something to people who've already made up their minds about you. You build it by caring about the work more than you care about their opinion of it. That's not a philosophy I read somewhere. That's something I learned in a renovation site at 7 in the morning with plaster dust in my hair and a decision to make about flooring that nobody else could make for me. Gideon Whitmore didn't know what he was walking into when he came around that hallway corner. He wasn't trying to say anything. He was just telling the truth, the way people do when they have no reason to soften it. And the truth, delivered plainly in front of my father and my mother and my pearls-touching mother, was that I had built something worth talking about. That's the thing about doing the actual work over a long period of time, with honesty, with your full attention, without cutting corners because you're tired or because no one is checking. Eventually, the work introduces itself. You don't have to. I'm not telling this story to settle a score. My family is complicated the way most families are. Not cruel, exactly. Just limited in the ways people are limited when they've stopped expanding their understanding of who someone can be. I've made my peace with that. What I want people to take from this is simpler than revenge. If you're the person in your family who nobody took seriously, if you're the one by the kitchen door, if you're the footnote, if you're the one your mother describes to her sister in a hallway voice she thinks you can't hear, keep going. Not for them, for the work, for the version of yourself that exists outside of anyone else's story about you. Character is what you do in the years no one is watching. Intelligence is knowing which problems are worth solving and then actually solving them. Persistence is getting up on the mornings when neither of those things feels like enough. I had all three, quietly the whole time. So do you.